Welcome to the Alaska Weather Show. I'm meteorologist Peter Chan, coming to you from the National Weather Service. On this Tuesday, August 3rd, 2021, we have a number of things to talk about today, plus we're going to get an update coming from our forecast office in Juneau. Record warmth, though, continues across east central areas, along with some smoky haze. We've had some smoke from wildfires, not just within the state, but also coming in from the Yukon. And some of that smoke has not only impacted around Fairbanks area, but also drifted down to around Anchorage and south central areas. And there have been record highs today. Anchorage set a record high yesterday on the 2nd of 88 degrees, and they are on their way to beating their record of 87 for today's date, the 3rd. They will likely close out in the upper 80s, possibly a 90-degree reading. And then as we shift emphasis to the low pressure in the Gulf, 2 to 4 inches of rain could fall across portions of the southern half of the Panhandle tonight through the day on Wednesday. And we'll have the Juneau forecast office giving a little highlight of that coming up here right after this segment. Pattern change, though, is going to start later on this week through the weekend and early next week. It is going to begin to turn cooler and wetter statewide as we approach mid-August. And south central parts of the state, coastal areas in the south central interior could get rather wet here from time to time. So looking at fire danger, the fire weather index for today, the highest fire danger is across east central areas, the Yukon Flats, along and north of the Alaska Range on into the upper Tanana Valley. And that translates to a moderate risk for significant fire start potential. The good news is we're not going to have winds, strong winds, no strong winds to worry about, or lightning strikes to be widespread and active enough to do that. So at least we should be okay here heading through the next day or two. Do not anticipate any sort of red flag warnings at this point. Now, the most important thing, pattern change that's kind of coming up here and really feeling it next week is I showed the whole U.S. because it kind of tells the story. Look at the red areas over the eastern Great Lakes, eastern Ohio Valley, interior Northeast. That's where the greatest potential for above normal summertime temperatures. Off to the west, it's cooler there out over the northern Rockies, and then up across Alaska because we have this kind of ridge, warm ridge, cooler trough there in the northern Rockies, a little bit of a warm ridge in the Pacific Northwest, and then cooler trough taking shape over Alaska. And that also means with an increased southerly flow in off of the Gulf, that's going to make the southern parts of the state, southern half of the state, trending wetter, especially south of the Alaska Range, the south central interior, and the coastal areas of the south central part of the state. So keep that in mind here. Try and get any outdoor projects that need dry weather done here the next few days. So looking at the satellite imagery, we have the low pressure circulation there over the Gulf, pumping in that moisture up across the Panhandle, where I said the southern half there is going to get the wettest conditions tonight into tomorrow. Areas of the interior west, even near the coast, have enjoyed some sunshine, warmer temperatures, even in the 60s, some 70s there in the Seward Peninsula. Enjoy it because there is a occluded front out over the Bering that's going to be weakening as a trough. As it moves in, it's going to spread more clouds and some showers with it, which is going to mean some cooler temperatures. Not as wet as what you had last week, but still it's going to provide, after a nice little break, it's going to provide a chance of some more wetting. And that low remains off the Russian coast out there over the northwest Bering, and that feature is going to be kind of hanging around here as we go through the next couple of days of surface map. So again, we have weak high pressure near Kodiak Island extending up through the west side and northern half of the state. This mid and upper level feature is beginning to break down. We have the low pressure sitting out over the Gulf that's pumping the moisture on up into the Panhandle, where some steadier, heavier rains at times tonight into Wednesday. And then the low out over the Bering is going to kind of fill a bit, and the occluded front will weaken into a trough. Another low kind of takes over there in the west-northwest Bering, just off the Russian coast. And the trough is going to try to push inland. We could see some widely scattered showers, isolated thunderstorms across the southern third of the state on Wednesday afternoon. Otherwise, the most persistent rains will be across the southern two-thirds of the Panhandle. And then going into the day on Thursday, the Panhandle range should become more showery and more scattered. Areas of the west, though, will start to see some scattered showers as the remnants of that front move inland. And we have a weak trough lagging up there through the central parts of the state with a few isolated storms around that. And looking at low temperatures here for Wednesday morning, mid to upper 50s across the southeast panhandle inner waterways. South central areas generally mid 50s, low mid 50s. It'll be mild. And with the rains falling, still looking at temperatures primarily in the lower 60s there. Ketchikan, Craig 64, maybe squeaking out of 70 if you can get a little smidgen of sun at Haines, but that might be pushing it. Still could hit 80 at McGrath, near 80 there at Glen Allen, but temperatures are generally going to be in the 60s along the coast. And then lows Thursday morning, mid 50s across the inner waterways of the southeast, and south central areas generally low to mid 50s. And then temperatures still on the warm side Thursday afternoon there over at Glen Allen, could squeak out an 80. Otherwise, everybody else generally 60s, though 70 Talkeetna, 72 down there, at cooling down a little bit at McGrath. And across the Arctic coast, lows in the 40s, otherwise quite mild along the Yukon Valley, 50s to near 60 for lows, even there at Nome near 60. And then temperatures are going to be back up around or a bit above 80 throughout the middle upper Yukon Valley, another 84 there, not as hot as today, but still quite warm for Fairbanks. And 60s and some 70s there, Kotzebue 73. And then going into Thursday morning, lows will be upper 30s to lower 40s along the Arctic coast, but generally 50s, a few 60s even showing up again in through the Yukon Valley, south slopes of the Brooks Range. And temperatures continuing generally on the warm side in the 70s, though beginning to come down into the 50s there across the Seward Peninsula and coastal areas of the west. Looking at the southwest, as we go through the southwest peninsula, lows will generally be in the 50s, even some lower 60s along the Yukon River, mid 40s to upper 40s there along the Aleutian chain, and then Wednesday afternoon highs still as we get up toward McGrath on up toward Galena and heading further north and east around 80. The 50s immediate coast and also out over the Aleutians, and then lows again will be in the 50s across the Yukon Kuskokwim valleys there in the southwest Thursday morning, upper 40s along the tip of the Alaska Peninsula into the Aleutians. And then Thursday afternoon we start to cool down in the west along coastal areas and pushing inland with highs getting back into the 50s. And so quick check now. Here's the temperature outlook coming up August 9th through the 13th. We're looking for temperatures to cool down statewide with the greatest likelihood there over the southwest quarter of the state. And then as we look at precipitation, we have low pressure that's indicative of just general broad low pressure out over the Bering. That's going to turn winds southerly and pump that moisture on up into south central areas, where there's, and that would spread it not just to, but even over the Alaska Range all the way up into the Fairbanks area and central parts of the state, looking to be a bit wetter than normal. Coming up now, here's my co-workers from the Juneau office with the latest on the rains for tonight and tomorrow.
Hi, I'm Grant Smith with the National Weather Service here in Juneau, Alaska, here with Cody Moore, also a meteorologist with the National Weather Service. Cody, we've been enjoying some pretty sunny days lately, but it sounds like we're going to be going to a pattern change here.
We have. I mean, and today's another nice day. You know, I'm out here in short sleeves, and, you know, the sun's still in my face. You know, I'm loving it. But unfortunately, that rain is going to start moving north through the Panhandle over the next couple of days. You know, today, currently Ketchikan and Prince of Wales Island, they have some rain showers going on, and that rain is going to increase even more tonight and tomorrow. And in fact, it'll be heavy at times across the south. The rain continues further north Wednesday into Thursday, but much lighter rain expected across the north. We actually have rainfall forecast of 2 to 4 inches across the south. That's where the heaviest rain is going to be through Thursday.
Okay, so the timing is it's going to move into the area from the south to the north Tuesday night into Wednesday, and as we go throughout Wednesday into Thursday, the rain will switch farther north then?
Exactly, and getting lighter as it does so.
Okay, so the heaviest you said was 2 to 4 inches in the south. Now, are we expecting any kind of flooding out of this?
Now, we coordinated with the River Forecast Center in Anchorage, and they like our rainfall totals. We're all in agreement on the 2 to 4 across the south, later across the north.
That's good.
We are expecting some river rises, but we're not expecting any major flooding from any of this rainfall.
So there you have it, folks. Had a nice sunny weekend and going into a little bit of a change. So I think I saw you mentioned earlier need to get the rain jackets back out. And I think mine is still hanging up in the garage from the last time it rained, whenever it was. I'll have to dig that out.
Yep, I have to go find mine.
All right. Well, thank you much, and stay tuned with more details always available on weather.gov/June.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Well, it's time now for your aviation weather. If you are planning a flight this midweek, Wednesday into Thursday, there are 3 dominant weather features that are affecting the state. Low pressure out over the Gulf of Alaska. We have a high pressure system ridge that's beginning to break down northern portion of the state, interior on up through the Brooks Range, North Slope areas. And then we have low pressure off of the eastern Russian coast with a frontal system in through the Bering, approaching the west coast. And for Wednesday afternoon, we could see an isolated thunderstorm pop up in the lower Yukon Valley as freezing levels are quite high associated with that ridge, and as moisture is being pushed onshore into portions of the west. IFR conditions becoming more prevalent there across the southern half of the Panhandle, and it's certainly extensive there southwest coast out over the Bering. Thursday morning, look for IFR conditions to creep northward along the Panhandle and then out over the Gulf and back through portions Cook Inlet, Kodiak Island along the southwest, pushing into the interior and much of the Bering. Thursday afternoon, we could see a few more isolated storms pop up along and south of the Alaska Range, Matsu Valley on up toward Talkeetna Mountains, eastward. And then IFR conditions creeping further north up there through the Panhandle, also back into the interior west and along the Arctic coast. So past conditions on Wednesday, Anaktuvik will start out with IFR conditions in the morning, north entrance up flying north through the North Slope. Otherwise, VFR conditions will prevail, especially later morning and afternoon. Adigan, same thing, some IFR conditions in the morning, north entrance and flying north along the North Slope. Otherwise, VFR conditions are anticipated. Lake Clark should generally be MVFR on Wednesday, MVFR improving to VFR at Merrill. And rainy should generally hold on to VFR conditions throughout the day Wednesday. Look for MVFR, southern entrance there of Windy Pass, otherwise VFR. And Isabel will see MVFR conditions in the early morning, otherwise improving to VFR. That'll also be the case at Mentasta, as well as Tanita, MVFR to VFR. Portage will see some pretty widespread IFR conditions in the early morning, but giving way to VFR conditions later in the morning and especially afternoon. And Chilkoot and White will start out VFR, becoming MVFR with further deterioration likely Wednesday night into Thursday, likely be going down to IFR by Thursday. And freezing levels, the low pressure system in the Gulf, we expect that core of colder air aloft below 10 and even below 8,000 feet central Gulf. Higher freezing level, 14,000 feet there in the southwest. As a result of being beneath that warm dome of high pressure that's centered up north of the Yukon River up through the Brooks Range and North Slope area. And then we expect lower freezing levels out over the central western Bering backside of the frontal system, near and below 6 to even below 4,000 feet there. Greatest icing potential will exist in the southeast, 14,000 feet to a flight level of 20,000 feet on Wednesday. Also in association with the frontal system out through the eastern Bering, 15,000 to a flight level of 22,000 feet south Nunavik Island, and then 12,000 to a flight level of 19,000 feet there, especially west-northwest of St. Matthew. So jet stream level winds are strongest, coming in upwards to 100 knots there, low pressure circulation that's out over the Gulf, and the stronger low that's out over the central Bering, with a jet core of 130 knots up centered near St. Matthew, and then dropping down to mid-levels, 9,000 feet. We see the low still, the circulation showing up there in the Gulf. And the stronger low pressure circulation there in the Bering that has winds upwards of 55 to 75 knots at mid-levels out of the southeast, bringing in some stronger winds aloft, 45 to 50 knots along the west coast and up into eastern Russia. And then dropping down to 3,000 feet, still have that low pressure circulation there in the Gulf that'll bring in some winds upwards of 35 to 40 knots at 3,000 feet into the southeast over portions of the eastern Aleutians, and then also into and along the west coast, Nunavik Island, on up toward the Seward Peninsula and St. Lawrence. And that's where we have the greatest turbulence potential for Wednesday. Surface to 3,000 feet around St. Lawrence. Surface to 4,000 feet, southern Seward Peninsula down into Norton Sound. into portions of the southwest, as well as we get out over the Alaska Peninsula, extending out into the eastern half of the Aleutians and an area of surface to 4,000 feet over the southeast panhandle. And that does it for your flight weather. Again, if you are heading out, check the latest conditions and get the latest forecast, and have a safe flight.
Thanks for joining us for another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder, joined again by Eric Stevens from the GINA, or Geographic Information Network of Alaska at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. Thanks for joining us again, Eric.
Glad to be here.
Thanks. We are talking about satellites today, and what are satellites? And the easy way to talk about that would be to introduce our friend the globe here, which is a round spheroid type shape. We haven't been on a flat Earth as far as history is known for several hundred years now, and because of that we also know that we are orbiting around other objects in space, and that objects are orbiting around the Earth as well. We call all those things satellites in some form or fashion, right, Eric?
Right. Well, this leads to the discussion of Johannes Kepler's research 400 years ago. Did some of the early work and founded the 3 laws of planetary motion, which are important to planets and also to weather satellites.
Okay.
Kepler's first law talks about how the orbit of an object around another object is an ellipse, not necessarily a circle.
Kind of a flattened circle?
Yeah, depending on how flat
squished
it could be.
Okay.
For our purposes, we'll just say they're mostly circular.
Okay.
The second law is most important for us, though, and that is the closer an object is to the thing it's orbiting, the faster it goes. So in the solar system, the planet Mercury is the closest planet to the sun. It orbits the sun in 88 days. It moves at 100,000 kilometers an hour.
It's a lot different
just
than Earth.
moving.
Okay.
Right. And further out from the Earth is Jupiter, and it moves at only 1/4 the speed of Mercury, and it has to go further, so it takes 12 of our years for Jupiter to make one lap. The further out you are, the slower you go.
Okay.
So we're talking about planets. What does it have to do with weather satellites? Turns out Kepler's laws apply to planets orbiting the sun. They also apply to satellites orbiting the Earth.
Okay.
You know, our natural satellite is the moon. There's the famous Apollo 8 Earthrise shot.
Beautiful shot.
Oh, yeah, you could just talk about that forever. December 1968, the moon is about 250,000 miles away from the Earth.
Okay.
Takes a month to go around the Earth. It's that far out, it takes a full month to do an orbit. Another shot here of the International Space Station. Instead of being 250,000 miles out, the ISS is only 250 miles up. It's really close. And so it doesn't take a full month for the space station to go around the Earth. It only takes 90 minutes. It's so close, it just whips right around 90 minutes.
Okay.
So weather satellites, there are a number of weather satellites, and there are a number of orbits. The further out you have the satellite, the longer it takes to go around the Earth. And this is important because different satellites have different purposes. So we have a satellite here. This little salt shaker lid will serve as our satellite going around the Earth. Let's say you have a satellite that's 22,000 miles above the Earth. This is kind of a magical spot because at that distance, it takes a full day for the satellite to go around the Earth. Imagine if you put your satellite 22,000 miles up from the equator and had it go with the Earth as the Earth spun.
The same speed.
Right.
Okay.
The satellite goes around the Earth just as fast as the Earth itself is turning. In effect, the satellite will hover in one spot.
Oh, I see.
And it appears when you make a movie loop of picture after picture after picture, you can replay that and you get these movie loops. Geostationary satellites, these are called. These are stationary in appearance. And they provide a constant frame of reference. We've got an example here. Another nice thing about these satellites, since they're that far out at 22,000 miles, you can see from pole to pole, which is nice. So they're pretty broad view and a constant frame of reference.
So those are the pictures. If you're watching a weather satellite loop on TV, your favorite weather show, that's the picture that you're going to see is one that's sitting over the same spot.
If you're seeing a movie loop play again and again, that came from geostationary satellites.
Okay.
That's the only way you can do that.
Yeah.
The bummer, though, for us in Alaska is we're up on the very top of the planet. And for geostationary satellites to work, they have to be over the equator. So for the geostationary bird to view Alaska, it's kind of like reading a book, but you're reading it edge on like that.
Right.
So there's another kind of orbit called the polar orbit,
Okay.
which is nice. We're near the pole.
Yeah.
And here's a satellite. Those polar orbiters are much closer to the Earth, getting down toward International Space Station elevation. And they're not in the equatorial plane. Rather, their orbital plane is inclined like this. And the Earth turns under that satellite as the satellite orbits. The nice thing about that is for Alaska, the satellite will go right over Alaska a few times a day. And so you get a much closer image. We've got a shot from the Sumi NPP satellite. Specifically, it's a true color image from the VIRS sensor. That's an acronym there.
Okay.
But it's a beautiful shot of Alaska, and you can see so much detail. The kind of detail, because you're close in,
Very high resolution.
you couldn't get this kind of view from geostationary satellites.
Okay.
The advantage of these polar orbiters is nice close imagery. You can see a lot of detail. The disadvantage, though, is that the satellite flies by,
Right.
and then you have to wait a while to get the next image. And if geostationary weaknesses are that you're reading the page like that, the polar orbiter, you're reading the page straight on, but it's so close, and then it zips by,
Okay.
and you have to wait for the satellite to come around the Earth again. So there's no one perfect solution. Different satellites for different orbits. Each has their strength, and amazingly, it all comes back to Johannes Kepler and his laws of planetary motion. The same laws that govern how the planets orbit the sun, they govern how the satellites orbit the Earth, and even our little pretend salt shaker right here.
Right, okay. Well, since the 1957 Sputnik, we've been putting man-made objects into orbit around the Earth and starting to get pictures back. Who knows what will happen in the next 50 to 100 years. Amazing
it's
stuff.
a growing science, and the future is bright.
Thank you so much for joining us again, Eric. And for more information on GINA and what the satellite systems do there and what Eric's been talking about today, you can go to the web address on your screen. For Alaska Weather Facts, I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back for our marine weather segment. In today's Sea Ice Edge, much of the Chukchi Sea is wide open, and we continue to see areas of pack ice well off of the Arctic coast, but we don't expect much retreat here over the next couple of days as winds are going to develop a bit more of a northeasterly component to them as we head into Thursday. And looking at what we can expect across the southeast panhandle, it's going to be a wet night into the day Wednesday, especially the southern 2/3. Locally 2 to 4 inches of rain could fall, and we're looking at winds southeasterly there, Ketchikan, Dixon entrance, waves 4 or 5 feet. North winds 10 to 15 knots, the inner canals on up through Lynn Canal, 2 to 3 footers. And then along the Gulf Coast there, small craft advisories, winds will be out of the southeast 25 knots, waves 7 to 8 feet. Winds will turn a little more east-northeast there, Yakutat westward with waves of 5 to 7 feet. And then on Thursday, inner waterways, southeast to south winds 10 to 15 knots, waves generally a couple of feet. And along at least the southern 2/3 south of Gustavus to Craig, look for east-southeast winds 15 to 20 knots, waves 6 to 7 feet, and winds more out of the west-northwest around 10 knots, 5 footers there, Yakutat westward. Pretty quiet on Wednesday across south-central areas. Variable winds around 10 knots in Cook Inlet as well as Prince William Sound with waves a couple of feet at best, and generally westerly off the Kenai with waves of a few feet. And then on Thursday, variable winds off the Kenai around 10 knots up into Prince William Sound, waves 4 feet there off the Kenai and a couple of feet in Prince William Sound, trying to turn a little bit more southwesterly as you go up the length of Cook Inlet, and waves 3 to 4 feet. Across the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island on Wednesday, winds southwest Kodiak Island 15 to 20 knots, waves 4 to 5 feet. But more southeast to southerly across the peninsula, waves 5 to 8 feet on the Pacific side and 3 to 6 feet on the Bering side. And then look for winds to turn more westerly across much of the area, 15 to 20 knots on Thursday, as what was once an occluded front is now more of a trough pushing eastward very slowly. And waves 6 feet or so on the Pacific side and 4 to 5 feet on the Bering side. Across the Aleutians on Wednesday, in the wake of that occluded front or trough, winds will be southwesterly to southerly across the eastern Aleutians, 20 to 25 knots, around 6 to 8 feet on the Pacific side and 4 to 7 feet on the Bering side. More westerly, 15 to 20 knots, 5 to 6 feet Kiska and Shimia. And then across the entire Aleutian chain, generally southerly winds on Thursday, 15 to 20 knots, waves 6 to 7 feet area wide. And then looking at the west coast, Wednesday, offshore flow east-southeast winds, but as you get out into the open waters west of Nunavik Island and north of St. Paul and St. George, look for 30 to localized 35 knot gales, waves 9 to 13 feet. and of course much less than that along the coast. And then by Thursday, as that occluded front pushes inland, winds will try to turn more westerly, around 15 to 20 knots, and waves running 4 to 6 feet. Along the Arctic and northwest coast, well, for Wednesday, easterly winds 10 to 15 knots along the Arctic coast, waves 2 to 4 feet, and east to northeast winds around 20 knots, the lower Chukchi Sea to the Strait, with waves of 3 to 4 feet. And then on Thursday, strongest winds will be off of Point Lay along the northwest coast, upwards to 30 knots from the northeast, and waves 9 to 11 feet there in through the lower Chukchi Sea, and northeasterly winds 15 to 20 knots along the Arctic coast. Therefore, not expecting pack ice to retreat at all with that sort of pattern there going up here through Thursday. And then looking at the looking at the surface maps, we have the low pressure out over the Gulf that's going to bring in a pretty good surge of moderate to locally heavier rain tonight through Wednesday. 2 to locally 4 inches of rain could fall across the southern half of the Panhandle in that time frame. Low pressure out over the central Bering is going to gradually weaken with the occluded front as it pushes slowly eastward. More of a trough as another low kind of takes shape off the Russian coast, becomes the main one, a 985 low. And we'll continue to see the lows spinning out there in the Gulf with weak trough out in south central areas by Thursday. Weather features are pretty weak. The low over the Gulf continues to weaken, and the remnants of that trough pushing into the interior southwest will produce some scattered showers and perhaps a few isolated storms, central and south central interiors along and especially south of the Alaska Range. That does it for the show tonight. Thank you for watching, and I want to thank my colleagues Grant Smith and Cody Moore for their contribution earlier in the show.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.